My fiancée laughed when her mom called my sister a charity case, so I walked out and never looked back. I'm 24, and until 2 weeks ago, I thought the worst thing about being engaged to someone from a wealthy family was feeling awkward at fancy restaurants. Turns out the real problem was discovering that money doesn't buy basic human decency and that the person I loved was capable of standing by while her family tore apart mine. Let me tell you about how one dinner party showed me exactly who my fiancé really was and why sometimes walking away is the only thing that saves your self-respect. I met Olivia at a bookstore coffee shop about 2 years ago. She was sitting alone reading some thick philosophy book, and when I accidentally knocked over her coffee while reaching for a napkin, she just laughed and said accidents happen. We ended up talking for 3 hours about everything from books to travel to our shared obsession with obscure documentaries. She was smart, funny, and had this genuine warmth that drew me in immediately. What I didn't know that day was that Olivia came from serious money. The kind of family that has buildings named after them and gets invited to charity galas where tickets cost more than most people make in a month. She didn't mention any of this during our first few dates, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have believed her if she had. She drove a normal car, wore regular clothes, and seemed genuinely interested in my very ordinary life. When she finally told me about her family's wealth, it was because she wanted me to understand why she was nervous about introducing me to her parents. She explained that they had very specific expectations about the men she dated, and that those expectations usually involved trust funds and boarding school educations. I appreciated her honesty, but I also told her that if her parents couldn't accept me for who I was, then maybe we weren't as compatible as we thought. Olivia insisted that wouldn't be a problem. She said her parents were good people who just needed time to get to know me. She was confident that once they saw how happy we made each other, everything else would fall into place. Looking back, I can see how naive we both were about what we were walking into. My family situation was pretty much the opposite of Olivia's. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19, leaving me to raise my younger sister Autumn, who was only 14 at the time. We managed to scrape by on life insurance money and my job as a marketing coordinator, but it had never been easy. Autumn was now 19 and in her second year of community college, working part-time at a retail store to help with expenses. I was incredibly proud of how hard Autumn had worked to build a life for herself despite everything we'd been through. She was smart, funny, and resilient in ways that constantly amazed me. She'd maintained good grades while working and helping with household expenses, never complaining about having to grow up faster than she should have. If anyone deserved respect and admiration, it was her. Olivia had met Autumn several times and seemed genuinely fond of her. She'd helped her with a few college applications and even offered to tutor her in economics when she was struggling with a particularly difficult class. I thought she understood how important Autumn was to me and how proud I was of everything she'd accomplished. The first time I met Olivia's parents was at a casual lunch at their country club about 6 months into our relationship. Her mother, Victoria, was polite but distant, asking surface-level questions about my job and education, while her father, Charles, mostly ignored me in favor of discussing business with Olivia. The whole experience felt like an audition I wasn't sure I wanted to pass, but Olivia seemed happy that it had gone reasonably well. Over the next year, I spent more time with Olivia's family at various social events and slowly started to understand the world she'd grown up in. Everything was about appearances and connections, who you knew, and where you'd gone to school, and what your family name meant in certain circles. It was exhausting, but I tried to navigate it gracefully for Olivia's sake. When I proposed to Olivia after 18 months of dating, it felt like the natural next step. We talked about marriage and both agreed we wanted to spend our lives together. I'd saved up for months to buy her a ring that wasn't embarrassingly small, and when I got down on one knee in the park where we'd had our first official date, she cried and said yes immediately. The engagement period should have been one of the happiest times of our lives, but it quickly became clear that planning a wedding with Olivia's family was going to be complicated. Victoria had very specific ideas about venues, guest lists, and everything else, while Charles seemed primarily concerned with the cost and how it would reflect on their family status. "We need to think about the kind of statement this wedding makes," Victoria said during one particularly tense planning session. "The venue, the flowers, the music, everything needs to reflect the kind of family Olivia comes from." I tried to contribute ideas, but quickly learned that my suggestions weren't really welcome unless they aligned with Victoria's vision. When I mentioned wanting to include some of my family traditions or invite my coworkers, Victoria would smile politely and then explain why that wouldn't work with their overall aesthetic. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago when Victoria invited me to what she called a small dinner party at their house. It was supposed to be an intimate gathering where I could meet some of Olivia's extended family and family friends before the wedding. What Victoria didn't mention was that she'd also invited Autumn. When Olivia told me her mother had extended the invitation to my sister, I was surprised but pleased. I thought maybe this was Victoria's way of showing that she accepted our family and wanted to include Autumn in their social circle. Autumn was nervous about the whole thing but excited too. She'd heard so much about Olivia's family and was curious to see how the other half lived. We spent the afternoon getting ready together. Autumn had bought a new dress with money from her part-time job, and I helped her pick out jewelry and shoes. She looked beautiful and sophisticated, and I was so proud walking into that house with her beside me. She belonged anywhere as far as I was concerned, and I wanted Olivia's family to see that. The house itself was exactly what you'd expect from people with that kind of money. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. Autumn whispered to me that it looked like a museum, and I had to agree. Everything was perfect and pristine and completely intimidating. Olivia greeted us at the door looking stunning in her expensive dress. She complimented Autumn on her outfit and introduced her to the other guests with genuine warmth. For the first hour or so, everything seemed to be going well. Autumn was holding her own in conversations about college and work, and several people commented on how articulate and intelligent she was. Then Victoria decided to give everyone a tour of the house. The house tour started innocently enough with Victoria leading our small group through the main living areas, pointing out various pieces of art and furniture that had been in the family for generations. Autumn asked thoughtful questions about the history of different pieces and seemed genuinely interested in learning about Olivia's family heritage. But I started to notice something uncomfortable happening. Victoria would answer Autumn's questions, but with this slightly condescending tone, like she was talking to a child rather than a 19-year-old college student. She'd explain things in overly simple terms and occasionally glance at the other guests with a look that seemed to say, "Isn't this amusing?" When we reached Olivia's childhood bedroom, Victoria made a point of showing us her various academic awards and trophies from expensive private schools. She talked about her prestigious summer camps and the European vacations that had broadened her worldview. Then she turned to Autumn with that same patronizing smile and asked, "What kind of activities were you involved in during high school, dear?" Autumn explained that she'd worked part-time throughout high school to help with family expenses, but had still managed to maintain good grades and participate in a few extracurricular activities. She mentioned the volunteer work she'd done at a local food bank and how she'd tutored younger students in math and science. "How admirable," Victoria said in a tone that made admirable sound like a consolation prize. "It's wonderful when young people learn the value of hard work early in life." The way she said it made my stomach clench. Like Autumn's circumstances were some kind of character-building exercise rather than the reality of two orphaned kids trying to survive on their own. As we continued the tour, I watched Victoria more carefully and realized she was systematically highlighting every difference between our families. She'd point out expensive items, casually mentioning their cost or provenance, always with that same smile that didn't reach her eyes. She talked about Olivia's education, her opportunities, her advantages, like she was delivering a lecture on the benefits of being born into money. Olivia seemed oblivious to what her mother was doing. She was chatting with the other guests and occasionally adding details to her mother's stories about her childhood. When Victoria mentioned her semester abroad in Italy, Olivia launched into an enthusiastic description of the art and culture she'd experienced, completely missing the way Autumn's face fell as she listened. The other guests were following Victoria's lead, making polite conversation with Autumn, but treating her like an interesting specimen rather than an equal. They'd ask questions about her work and school, but in the same tone you'd use to ask a child about their favorite cartoon. It was subtle but unmistakably condescending. When we reached the library, Victoria made a show of pointing out first edition books and rare manuscripts. She mentioned that Olivia had been reading at a college level by middle school and had always been encouraged to pursue intellectual interests. Then she turned to Autumn again. "I imagine you didn't have much time for reading with all your work responsibilities," she said with fake sympathy. "It must have been difficult to focus on academics when you had so many other pressures." "Actually, I love reading," Autumn replied quietly. "I've read most of the classics, and I'm working my way through some contemporary literature courses at school." "How nice," Victoria said dismissively. "Community college must be a very different experience from traditional university life." The way she said community college made it sound like some kind of lesser institution instead of the practical choice it had been for us financially. I felt my jaw clench, but Olivia was across the room examining a painting and didn't seem to hear the exchange. By the time we sat down for dinner, I was on edge, but trying to maintain my composure for Autumn's sake. She was handling everything with more grace than I would have managed at her age, but I could see the strain starting to show. Her smile was getting tighter, and she was speaking less frequently. The dinner conversation started with safe topics like current events and local news, but gradually shifted toward more personal territory. Victoria began asking the other guests about their children's accomplishments, their educational achievements, their career successes. It felt like a competition where everyone was trying to one-up each other with stories of excellence and privilege. When the conversation inevitably turned to Autumn, Victoria's tone became especially saccharine. "Tell us about your future plans, dear," she said. "What are you hoping to do after you finish your education?" Autumn explained her interest in social work and her goal of eventually getting a master's degree in counseling. She talked about wanting to help kids who'd been through traumatic experiences like losing their parents. Her passion for the subject was obvious, and I felt proud listening to her articulate her dreams so clearly. "Social work," Victoria repeated thoughtfully. "How wonderfully altruistic. Of course, the financial rewards aren't quite what you'd find in other fields, but I suppose when you're already accustomed to a certain lifestyle that matters less." The comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Victoria had essentially said that Autumn was already poor, so choosing a low-paying career wouldn't be much of a sacrifice. The other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one said anything to challenge the obvious cruelty of the remark. I looked at Olivia, expecting her to defend my sister or at least acknowledge how inappropriate her mother's comment had been. But she was cutting her steak and seemed focused on her plate. Either she hadn't heard what her mother said or she was choosing to ignore it. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite my rising anger, "Autumn chose social work because she has a genuine desire to help people. Not everyone measures success purely in financial terms." Victoria's smile became even more artificial. "Of course, dear. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that some of us have the luxury of choosing careers based on passion while others have to be more practical about earning potential." The irony was staggering. She was calling Autumn impractical for choosing a helping profession while simultaneously criticizing her for being poor. There was no winning with someone determined to find fault with everything you did. But the worst was yet to come. After dinner, Victoria suggested we move to the sitting room for coffee and dessert. As we were transitioning, one of the other guests, a woman named Cordelia, made what she probably thought was a sympathetic comment to me. "It's so wonderful that you've taken such good care of your sister," she said in a voice dripping with false warmth. "Not everyone would have made such sacrifices. You're practically a saint." Before I could respond, Victoria chimed in. "Yes, it really is admirable. Though I do wonder if being a charity case can't be easy for her self-esteem." Charity case. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked around the room waiting for someone to say something. Waiting for Olivia to defend the woman she'd supposedly grown fond of. Instead, I heard laughter. Olivia was chuckling along with her mother's comment. She was actually laughing at my sister being called a charity case. Autumn's face had gone completely pale. She was staring at her hands, trying to disappear into herself. "Excuse me," I said, standing up. "Autumn, we're leaving." Victoria looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, did I say something wrong?" "Yes, you did," I said, my voice getting stronger. "You called my sister a charity case, and that's deliberate cruelty." Olivia finally looked up. "Come on, babe, don't be so sensitive. Mom didn't mean anything by it. Your mother called my sister a charity case, and you laughed," I said, staring directly at her. "I wasn't laughing at her," Olivia said defensively. "It was awkward, and I didn't know what to say." "You could have said that it was inappropriate," I replied. "Instead, you laughed." "You're overreacting," Olivia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Tell me, Olivia, what would you call someone who's raised herself from age 14 while maintaining good grades? What would you call someone pursuing education with no financial help? Someone dedicated to helping others?" She didn't have an answer. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said, turning to Victoria. "This is you showing me exactly who you are." I took Autumn's hand and headed toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Olivia calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The car ride home was emotionally draining. Autumn was quiet for most of the trip, but I could see her replaying the evening in her mind. When we finally pulled into our driveway, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm sorry you had to choose between me and your fiancé." "There was no choice to make," I said firmly. "You're my sister, and I love you. What happened tonight was completely unacceptable." "But you loved her," she said. "I could see it. You were going to marry her. And now it's over because of me." "It's over because of her," I corrected. "Because when it mattered, she showed me who she really is. That has nothing to do with you." We sat in the car for a few more minutes talking about what had happened. Autumn admitted she'd felt uncomfortable from the moment we arrived, but had been trying to give Olivia's family the benefit of the doubt. She'd noticed Victoria's condescending tone and the way the other guests treated her, but had hoped she was being oversensitive. The charity case comment was designed to hurt, she said. I could handle the rest, but that crossed a line. Inside our apartment, I helped Autumn out of her dress, and we made hot chocolate like we used to do when we were younger and the world felt too overwhelming. We talked about the evening and about how some people use money and status as weapons to make others feel small. You know what the worst part was? Autumn said as we sat on our couch. I actually started to believe some of it. Like maybe I really was just some charity case who didn't belong in that world. Don't you dare think that, I said fiercely. You belong anywhere you want to be. You've worked harder than anyone I know, and you should be proud of everything you've accomplished. That night, I turned off my phone knowing Olivia would try to call. I needed time to process what had happened without having to defend my decision or listen to excuses for inexcusable behavior. I spent hours lying awake replaying the evening and trying to understand how I'd misjudged someone so completely. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls and text messages from Olivia. Most of them followed a predictable pattern, first apologizing for her mother's behavior, then minimizing what had happened, then blaming me for overreacting, then promising it would never happen again. The messages got increasingly desperate as the night went on, but none of them showed any real understanding of what had gone wrong. Around noon, I finally called her back. She answered on the first ring. Thank God, she said. I've been going crazy. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I said calmly. I saw everything I needed to see last night. My mother was completely out of line, she admitted. I know that. But she's set in her ways, and she didn't mean to be cruel. She just doesn't understand your situation. Our situation isn't complicated, Olivia. We're two siblings who lost our parents and have been taking care of each other ever since. There's nothing to misunderstand about that. I know, but to people like my mother, that kind of struggle is foreign. She's never had to worry about money or work for anything she wanted. She doesn't know how to relate to people who have. Then maybe she shouldn't invite people into her home just to mock them, I said. And maybe when she does cross the line, her daughter should defend the people she claims to care about instead of laughing along. I wasn't laughing at Autumn, she insisted. I was uncomfortable and I handled it badly, but I would never intentionally hurt her. Your intent doesn't matter, I replied. The impact is what matters. You laughed when someone called my sister a charity case. That's what happened regardless of what you meant to do. Olivia was quiet for a long moment. What can I do to fix this? She finally asked. Nothing, I said. Because this isn't about one bad evening or one inappropriate comment. This is about fundamental differences in our values. Your family looks down on people who have less money than they do, and you're okay with that. I'm not. That's not fair, she said. You're judging my entire family based on one dinner. I'm judging your family based on their behavior, I corrected. And I'm judging you based on yours. When you had to choose between defending someone who needed defending and staying comfortable with your family's prejudices, you chose comfort. I chose not to start a fight in my parents' house, she said defensively. You chose not to stand up for what's right because it would have been inconvenient for you, I replied. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. We talked for another 10 minutes, but it was clear we weren't going to find common ground. Olivia couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of what she saw as a social misstep. I couldn't understand how someone could witness deliberate cruelty and dismiss it as a misunderstanding. When I hung up, I felt sad but also relieved. The engagement had been over the moment Olivia laughed at her mother's comment. Everything else was just confirmation of what I already knew about her character. Over the next few days, Olivia tried several more times to contact me. She sent flowers with apology notes that completely missed the point. She showed up at my office wanting to talk about how we could work through this and save our engagement. She even reached out to my friend Carlos asking him to intervene on her behalf. But I'd made my decision and I was sticking to it. Carlos called me 3 days after the dinner party. He'd heard Olivia's version of events and wanted to check on me. She says you called off the engagement because her mother made one insensitive comment, Carlos said. That seems pretty extreme. I explained what had actually happened, including the systematic way Victoria had torn down Autumn throughout the evening and Olivia's reaction to her mother's cruelty. Carlos was quiet for a long time after I finished. Damn, he finally said. I had no idea it was that bad. She made it sound like a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. That's how she sees it, I said. And that's exactly the problem. A week later, Olivia showed up at our apartment. I saw her through the peephole and almost didn't answer, but I realized we needed to have one final conversation to put this to rest permanently. I've been thinking about what you said, she began when I opened the door. About me not standing up for Autumn. You're right that I should have said something. Should have but didn't, I said. When it mattered, you chose to laugh along with your mother's cruelty instead of defending someone who needed defending. I can learn to be better, she said desperately. I can learn to stand up to my family when they're wrong. People can change. We can still get married and work through this. Maybe people can change, I agreed. But I can't wait around to find out if you're capable of developing basic human decency. Autumn and I deserve better than someone who has to learn not to laugh when we're being humiliated. Please don't do this, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I love you. We're engaged. We can work through this. We were engaged, I corrected. And you don't love me, Olivia. You love the idea of me. You love having a fiancé with a compelling backstory that makes you feel progressive and open-minded. But when loving me meant standing up to your family or challenging your comfort zone, you weren't interested. That's not true, she protested. It is true, I replied. Real love isn't just about the good times. It's about defending each other when defense is needed. It's about choosing your partner over social convenience. It's about understanding that attacking someone's family is attacking them. You failed that test completely. She stood there for a moment looking like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Finally, she asked, Is there anything I can say that would change your mind? What about the wedding? What about all our plans? The wedding is off, I said simply. Because this isn't about what you say anymore. It's about what you did. And what you did was show me exactly who you are when the pressure is on. What am I supposed to tell people? She asked, her voice getting desperate. What am I supposed to tell my parents? Tell them the truth, I said. Tell them you laughed when your mother called my sister a charity case and that I decided I couldn't marry someone with so little character. After she left, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The conversation had confirmed everything I'd already known about Olivia's character and her family's values. She would never understand why her behavior had been so hurtful because she fundamentally didn't see Autumn and me as equals deserving of basic respect. The practical aspects of calling off the engagement were more complicated than the emotional ones. We'd already put deposits down on a venue, booked a caterer, and sent save-the-date cards to family and friends. Olivia's parents had paid for most of the wedding expenses, and I knew they'd be furious about losing those deposits. I didn't care. The money was a small price to pay for avoiding a lifetime married to someone who would always prioritize her family's prejudices over basic human decency. I called the vendors myself to cancel everything and took responsibility for any cancellation fees that weren't covered by Olivia's parents. 2 weeks later, I heard through mutual friends that Olivia was already dating someone new. His name was something pretentious like Pemberton or Prescott, and he came from old money just like her family. He'd gone to boarding school and his parents belonged to the same country club as her parents. He was exactly what Victoria had always wanted for her daughter. I wasn't surprised or hurt by the news. If anything, it proved my point about Olivia perfectly. She hadn't really been interested in building something meaningful with someone different from herself. She'd been experimenting with dating outside her social class, and when that experiment became inconvenient, she'd gone right back to what was safe and familiar. Autumn finished her associate degree that spring with honors and transferred to a 4-year university on a partial scholarship. She was thriving academically and had started volunteering at a crisis counseling center where she was already making a difference in people's lives. She was exactly the kind of person who makes the world better, and I was proud to be her brother. You know what's funny? She said one evening as we were having dinner together. I spent that whole evening feeling like I didn't belong in Olivia's world. But now I realize I wouldn't want to belong somewhere that treats people the way they treated us. She was absolutely right. We'd both learned something valuable about the difference between having money and having class. Olivia's family had all the external markers of success, but none of the character that actually matters. They were wealthy but not wise, accomplished but not kind, powerful but not decent. 6 months after calling off the engagement, I started dating someone new. Her name was Jordan, and she was a social worker who'd grown up in a working-class family similar to mine. She understood struggle and resilience and had built her career around helping people rather than judging them. When I told her about Autumn and everything we'd been through, her response was admiration, not pity. Your sister sounds amazing, she said after meeting Autumn for the first time. You both do. It takes incredible strength to build a life after losing your parents so young. That's what real respect looked like. Not the condescending sympathy Olivia's family had offered, but genuine recognition of our accomplishments and character. Jordan saw our challenges as evidence of our strength, not as reasons to look down on us. A year later, I ran into Olivia at a coffee shop downtown. She was with her new boyfriend who looked exactly like I'd expected, polished, expensive, and completely unremarkable. They were discussing their upcoming engagement party, and he was complaining about the guest list being too large for their preferred venue. Olivia saw me and looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure whether to acknowledge me or pretend she hadn't noticed. I solved her dilemma by walking right past their table without a glance. I had nothing to say to her and no interest in her awkward small talk. As I left the coffee shop, I felt grateful for how everything had turned out. Olivia's mother had done me a favor that night, even though that certainly hadn't been her intention. She'd shown me exactly who Olivia really was before I'd made the biggest mistake of my life by marrying into a family that would never truly respect me or the people I loved. Some people are born into privilege and use it to lift others up. Others use it as a weapon to make themselves feel superior. Olivia and her family fell into the latter category, and I was better off without them in my life. The charity case comment had hurt, but it had also revealed the truth about people I'd been trying too hard to impress. And sometimes the truth, even when it's painful, is exactly what you need to set yourself free.